Our text this morning will be Matthew chapter 11, verses 28 through 30. Matthew 11, 28 through 30. I want to begin with my usual work illustration right out of the gate this morning. For those who don't know, I work outside the church as a night manager at a grocery store. But once, while pulling a night shift, the coordinator that was in charge of the front end registers informed me that his 10 p.m. cashier had called in. And he told me that he had someone else in mind to ask to stay till that 10 p.m. time frame and to fill this spot, and he would get back to me as soon as he had that locked in and knew more. So he asked a young girl. She said yes, and everything seemed to be going well. Then about an hour later, the same supervisor called me back to tell me that she was walking back her commitment, and she was asking if it was okay to stay until 9 p.m. instead of 10. He was a little annoyed by this. However, I said, go ahead and grant the request. It's no big deal. And then I went over to her register to just check on her a little bit and see how she was doing. And I walked up to her and I asked, hey, is everything okay? And she didn't respond with words. She just looked at me, and her eyes were starting to well up a little bit. And so I shut her lane down, and I brought her into my office. And in the office, I asked her, what's going on? How can I help? And she just dissolved. She just started crying, and she cried for a while, and I kept giving her tissues, and I offered her bottles of water, whatever I could do while that was going on. And finally, when she got herself composed enough to talk, she explained to me that she carries a good portion of her family's expenses with her job. She actually partners with the rest of her family in paying the bills and taking care of the family. And so she needed the money for her family, and that's why she said yes to staying late. But when she agreed to staying late, she upset her boyfriend, who was looking forward to spending time with her. And she explained that she loved her boyfriend very much. He treats her very well, and she didn't want to disappoint him. And that's why she asked if she could walk back the commitment a little bit. But when she asked to walk back the commitment a little bit, she upset her supervisor, the one I was describing to you earlier. And she explained that she loves her job and doesn't want to let her team down because she knows that everyone needs her there. And so there she was. You see where this is kind of going? She was kind of feeling this crushing vice of pressure, and she was bearing the burden of family pressure at home, and she was also trying to keep her boyfriend and her team at work happy. She was trying to keep everybody's everything maintained and everybody happy. And in that moment of pressure, it all kind of gave way, and she buckled under it. I said, how you doing? And she just dissolved, okay? Now, I want you to know, she's just fine now. We got it all sorted out. But to be honest, as that was happening, I really connected with it. I connected with how she felt. I know what it's like to be stretched to the limit and beyond, trying to meet everyone's everything all the time and keep everyone happy. And I know what it's like to feel crushed by the burdens that I'm bearing. And sometimes over the years, I've even felt a little bit trapped. And I don't know if any of you have felt that kind of experience too. I don't know if anyone watching this online will feel that way. But it makes me wonder, that whole experience made me wonder how many people here this morning and how many people that might be watching online feel this way today. Whatever your burdens may be, whether they be family pressure or financial pressure or grief or guilt or addictions or whatnot, have your burdens become so heavy that you do not just feel tired, you feel literally crushed by them. With that in mind, if this is you today, Jesus spoke into this exhaustion with one of the most gracious invitations in all of the scripture. And that is our text this morning. And it goes like this. Then Jesus said, come to me, all of you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and let me teach you, because I am humble and gentle at heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy to bear, and the burden I give you is light. So, note here in this text that Jesus sees you in your struggle. He does not shame you for being weary. And also note that Jesus doesn't dismiss how you feel by saying such things as, the burden you're bearing really isn't that heavy. You just need to suck it up and try harder. Have you ever shared, do you ever have memories of when you were a kid sharing your burdens with your parents and them going, oh, you think that's bad? You should see what I got to deal with in a day. It didn't make you feel better when they did stuff like that. That's not the way our Heavenly Father responds to us when we call out to him with our burdens. Jesus fully recognizes the crushing burdens that you're carrying, and he says in response, come to me, let me help. Now in our text, Jesus shows us how he lifts our burdens, and his deliverance comes in 3 stages, which are up on the board: surrender, stand, and surge. Again, surrender, stand, and surge. These will be our points this morning. So first, Jesus calls on us to surrender and to find peace. Again, he calls on us to surrender and to find peace. And we see this in verse 28 of the text, where it says, "Come to me, all of you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest." There's 2 things to note here in this text. First, note that we don't work the problem on our own before we come to him. We don't work the problem on our own before we come to him. Jesus doesn't say, "Come to me with a plan to get your life back on track first." He simply says, "Come to me." Come with your burdens. Come with your mess. Come with your failures. Come without a plan. Come as you are. In other words, the first step is to simply surrender. It is to say, "Uncle." When we surrender, we're acknowledging the situation that we're in, and we're humbly acknowledging the part that we have played in creating it, if applicable. And many times, most cases, we'll find that there was some part that we played in it. And we're also acknowledging our inability to correct it on our own. And finally, from that broken and bankrupt position, we invite Jesus into our lives, into our mess. Surrender is saying, "Lord, this is where I am. This is what I've done. This is what I can't fix. This is what I can't carry. I need you." You follow me? That's what it means to surrender. But also note that our burdens are not removed after we come. They're not removed after we come. Surrender doesn't remove the past 2 bills or the family obligations or the consequences of previous bad choices or whatever. The responsibilities are still there. What he does instead is add something to the mix that wasn't there before, and that is his peace. In other words, when we surrender, our burdens are not removed. Instead, God gives us his peace so that we no longer feel overwhelmed and crushed by them anymore. Does that make sense? This is what Paul was speaking of in the book of Philippians chapter 4, verses 6 through 7, when he said, "Don't worry about anything. Instead, pray about everything. Tell God what you need and thank him for all he has done. Then you will experience God's peace, which exceeds everything we can understand. His peace will guard your hearts and minds as you live in Christ." When you surrender, you don't lose your burdens. You gain God's peace. Does that make sense? The burdens don't go away, but you gain God's peace. And this is the first step to your deliverance, to our deliverance. Now, regarding the young girl I mentioned earlier, she didn't leave the office with her burdens removed, but she left feeling a lot better. We talked a lot about how that situation came to be what it was, and she recognized that she didn't set enough boundaries and wasn't good at saying no. Have you ever been that person who is not good at saying no? You want to say yes to everybody, you want to please everybody. I get it. I really, really, really get it. And I remember as I was talking to her, I said, "Hey, from now on, going forward, when we ask you to come into work extra and it isn't a good time, I want you to say no. This is your homework. You have to tell me no when it's not good for you." And I said, "Shake on it, And by then she was even laughing a little bit, and she was kind of coming out of it. And after she mopped herself up off the floor and went back to work, she had a big smile on her face the whole rest of the night. Her burdens were still there. All this stuff was still there, but she had God's peace, which was enabling her to thrive under the burdens. Does that make sense? Burdens are still there, but God's peace changes the dynamic right then and there. But there's more. Next, we're called to stand up and find Jesus. Stand up and find Jesus. We see this in verse 29 of the text, where it says, "Take my yoke upon you, let me teach you, because I am humble and gentle at heart, and you will find rest for your souls." And so after Jesus says, "Come to me," he says, "Take my yoke upon you and learn of me." And this is important because Jesus doesn't merely invite us to collapse at his feet. He does, he tells us to do that, but he doesn't stop there. He doesn't say just collapse at his feet. He invites us to rise and to walk with him. Now, a yoke was used for work. It joined 2 together so that the load could be carried in step. So when Jesus says, take my yoke upon you, he's not saying your life will now have no responsibility. He's saying you do not have to carry those responsibilities alone. That's the difference. You don't have to carry them alone. And this, in this reality, in this awareness, is where we stand back up. Once we find peace and regain our bearings, we stand back up and begin facing life again, but not the way that we did before. Before, we were carrying the burden alone. Now we are yoked with Christ. And with this in mind, standing does not mean suddenly we have all the answers. Standing does not mean that tomorrow is already solved. And it does not mean that the entire path is cleared and everything is worked out now. Standing means that we have enough faith to face what is in front of us today, trusting that Jesus will meet us with what we need for tomorrow. Make sense? Again, standing means that we have enough faith to face what is in front of us today, trusting that Jesus will meet us with what we need for tomorrow. This is what Jesus spoke of earlier in Matthew's gospel when he said this, and this is pretty familiar as well. It's Matthew chapter 6, verse 34. So don't worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will bring its own worries and its own troubles. I'm paraphrasing. Today's trouble is enough for today. Sufficient is today its trouble. Maybe you remember it that way. To be clear, Jesus is not telling us to be irresponsible and not even, who cares, it'll all work itself out. He's simply teaching us not to be crushed by tomorrow before tomorrow comes. Does that make sense? How many of you have taken years off your life worrying about things that you can't control that aren't even here today? He's saying, don't be crushed by tomorrow before it comes. There is grace for today, and there will be grace for tomorrow. And we are not meant to carry tomorrow's burden with today's strength. We're supposed to be carrying today's burden with today's strength. And in this confidence, we stand up and we do the next right thing that is in our power to do, whatever it is. We make that phone call. We have that conversation. We go to work. We ask forgiveness. We take that first step, whatever it is. And as we do so, we find Jesus. He's right there alongside of us, bearing the burden with us and making it manageable. That's the way this works. Now, this is a kind of a silly example. It's relevant. The only one who really knows about it is Janice. And she knows it because I kept kicking her out of my office. But my office was a disaster. It still kind of is. It's not as bad as it was, but it really was bad for a while. I was working, maybe Stephanie knows about it. We'll see. But working 2 jobs, it was just, I got behind on some things. And it got to where there was just clutter and just junk everywhere. And I was getting depressed looking at it. And I was even getting a little bit embarrassed looking at it. And so Janice would knock on the door and want to come in, and I would like push her to the door because I didn't even want to look at it. I didn't want anyone to see it. It was just really embarrassing to me. And eventually I got to a better place with that. I eventually moved towards overcoming that in a very simple way. I just started grabbing one piece of paper at a time. Instead, you know how you look at the whole thing, and you're just like, I don't know how I'm going to deal with all this. I just don't even know where to begin. Where do you begin? You begin with one paper at a time. You pick it up and you read it and you do what you do. And you move to the next one, and you move to the next one, and you move to the next one. And as I did that, my energy returned, ideas began to flow, opportunities began to present themselves, and now I can really see, it's starting to look like an office again. And there are days I still walk in there and I'm like, but I get past it by picking up one paper at a time and starting that process again. And inevitably, the energy flows and the ideas come. And in the same way, we find Jesus as we stand and face our burdens, taking one step at a time with the power that we have in the moment and discovering that Jesus is right alongside us, bearing the burden with us. That's not all, though. Not only do we find Jesus in this moment, but we also learn of him. As the text says, take my yoke upon you and learn of me. This is not merely informational. Bible studies are good, don't get me wrong. Sermons are good. Theology is good. But we do not truly learn the character of Christ until we walk through real life with him. We learn his patience when life moves slowly. We learn his faithfulness when we're afraid. We learn his strength when we are weak. We learn his wisdom when we don't know what to do. We learn his gentleness when we're ashamed. We learn his presence when we thought we were alone. Standing. The idea here is that standing is not self-effort. Standing is faith in motion. It's facing the burden again, but this time as we face the burden again, Christ is with us at our side. And not only do we find him there bearing the burden, but we learn from him at the same time. It's possible to go to church and to sit in Bible studies and to not really learn about Jesus because you're not casting your cares upon him. You're still bearing your burdens yourself. And so you can come and get educated about Jesus, but you don't really learn what he's like, and you don't assimilate his character till you get into the mess, and you allow him into that part of your life. Now, you ever notice sometimes that you walk into a church and it feels like everyone around is all put together and stuff like that? It's not the ones who are put together that learn of Jesus. It's the ones who are a mess and let Jesus in and are honest about that learn what he's really like. But finally, we're called to surge forward and find fruitfulness. We're called to surge forward and find fruitfulness. We see this in verse 30 of the text, the last verse where it says, "For my yoke is easy to bear, and the burden that I give you is light." Jesus says, my yoke is easy, my burden is light. And this doesn't mean that there's no yoke. It doesn't mean that there's no burden. It means that the burden becomes different when it is carried with Christ. The yoke of Jesus is not crushing. The way of Jesus is not destructive. And the leadership of Jesus doesn't grind us down until there's nothing left. His yoke actually restores us. His presence strengthens us, and his peace steadies us. Also, his grace is what carries us. And so over time, something begins to happen as we are yoked with him. The person who once felt like they couldn't go on begins to move again. The person who was once emotionally exhausted begins to regain their capacity. The person who was buried under pressure begins to bear fruit instead. And the person who thought they were finished discovers strength that they didn't know that they had before. And this is what I mean when I say the surge. The surge is not the result of having every burden removed. The surge is the result of learning how to share the burden with Jesus over the long haul. And this is what the Apostle Paul meant in Philippians 4, verse 13, when he said, I can do all things through Christ, which strengthens me. I can do all things. Paul wasn't saying, I can do anything I want. He was saying, I can endure every circumstance God allows because Christ is strengthening me. In his words in different places in that epistle, he basically put it this way: I can be brought low, and I can abound. I can face need, and I can face plenty. I can keep going, and I can remain fruitful. I can bear fruit, and I can do all things, again, through Christ who strengthens me. And this is what happens when we are yoked with Jesus. We do not just survive the burden. We actually become fruitful in the midst of the burden. We don't just get back to where we used to be. We grow into someone stronger and humbler and wiser and more useful in the hands of God. The burden that once threatened to crush us becomes the place where we learn Christ and walk with Christ and bear fruit through Christ. And we find that we are even more energetic and productive than we ever thought possible with the old burdens still present. We still have them, but we're cranking out more and doing more and fruitful in ways we never thought possible, even though the burden is still there. This is what happens when you learn how to be yoked with the Lord and let him bear the burdens with you consistently. That's what he's talking about here, and that's what we mean by surge. Now, A.B. Simpson is a classic example of this. A.B. Simpson is the founder of the denomination that we now call Christian Missionary Alliance. I've talked about him before. I've shared a little bit about him. Many of you know this already, but his life was filled with burdens. He suffered with anxiety his whole childhood into adulthood. He suffered, especially in his childhood, with bouts of anxiety and panic that left him bedridden as a child, to where they didn't even know if he was going to be able to come out of it. He did eventually, and he came back and he went into ministry. But as he went into ministry, he actually suffered nervous breakdowns. Sometimes he described being so exhausted after preaching on Sunday that he couldn't recover till about Wednesday before he could get up and begin working again. And his health failed. He began to have heart issues early on in his 40s and stuff like that. But he eventually learned how to be yoked with Jesus kind of in a health crisis during that time. And as a result, he spent the next 4 decades of his life working basically 20 hours a day, 7 days a week, and he never seemed to get tired. He had personal business ventures to fund himself, and he ran ministries and planted churches and wrote periodicals and magazines. The man just never stopped, and he was joyous and never hurried, never rushed, just full of energy the entire time. His wife complained about how their bed sheets were covered with ink all the time, because when he would eventually crawl into bed, he would have a pen and paper there writing ideas for his publications until he would fall asleep, and he would fall asleep and the pen would fall out of his hand and it would stain the sheets. And she quit arguing with him, and she just got used to having ink stains on the sheet all the time. So that's the effect that being yoked with Jesus had upon him. He went from being burdened and crushed all the time to literally cranking out work like a machine and never stopping, and not even feeling tired as a result. Like, he took his work to bed with him. That's the way it was. Once we learn how to be yoked with Jesus, we stand up on our burdens and then some. You will stand up and be able to face them, but you will be able to do more beyond that. And in conclusion, Jesus does not call the weary to pretend that they are strong. He calls them to come, okay? If you are burdened, come to him. If you are ashamed, come to him. If you're overwhelmed, come to him. If you just feel completely crushed by what's going on in your life, come to him. Don't come to him with a plan of how to fix it all. You've been trying to fix it all for this long and it hasn't been working. Just come to him and surrender to him. And when you surrender, you'll find peace. Bring the burden honestly to Jesus. Stop pretending that you can carry it yourself, and you will find his peace. The burden won't go away, but you'll find his peace in the midst of it. And then once you get your bearings sorted out, stand back up, and you're going to find Jesus carrying that burden with you. It's still there, but it's manageable because he's there carrying it with you. And over time, as you learn to do that, you will find a surge. You will find that you're cranking out more things, you're doing more stuff than ever before, and you're joyous the whole time because you continue to have God's peace. You will be able to do things never thought possible. You will be productive and fruitful in ways you never thought possible. The promise of this text is not that Jesus removes every burden immediately. The promise is better than that. Jesus gives himself. And when Jesus is in the yoke with you, the burden that once crushed you becomes something that he can use to teach you and to strengthen you and to make you fruitful. And so hear his invitation again in closing. Come to me, all of you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Are you burdened? Are you crushed? Answer his invitation. Do it today. He's listening and he's waiting for you.